Letter 3. You have noticed that the human being is a curiosity. In times past he has had, and worn out and flung away, hundreds and hundreds of religions. Today he has hundreds and hundreds of religions and launches not fewer than 3 new ones every single year. I can enlarge that number and still be within the facts. One of his principal religions is called the Christian. A sketch of it will interest you. It sets forth in detail in a book containing 2 million words called Old and New Testaments. It also has another name, the Word of God. For the Christian thinks every word of it was dictated by God, the one I've been speaking of. It is full of interest. It has noble poetry in it and some clever fables and some blood-drenched history and some good morals and a wealth of obscenity and upwards of 1,000 lies. This Bible is built mainly out of fragments of older Bibles that had their day and crumbled to ruin, so it noticeably lacks in originality. Necessarily, its 3 or 4 most imposing and impressive events all happened in earlier Bibles. All of its best precepts and rules of conduct came also from those Bibles. There are only 2 new things in it, hell for one, and that singular heaven I have told you about. What shall we do? If we believe with these people that their God invented these cruel things, we slander him. If we believe that these people invented them themselves, we slander them. It is an unpleasant dilemma in either case, for neither of these parties has done us any harm. For the sake of tranquility, let us take a side. Let us join forces with the people and put the whole ungracious burden upon him, heaven, hell, Bible and all. It does not seem right, it does not seem fair, and yet when you consider that heaven and how crushingly charged it is with everything that is repulsive to a human being, how can we believe a human being invented it? And when I come to tell you about hell, the stain will be even greater still, and you will be likely to say, no, a man would not provide that place for either himself or anybody else. He simply couldn't. That innocent Bible tells about the creation. Of what? The universe? Yes, the universe in 6 days. God did it. He did not call it the universe. That name is modern. His whole attention was upon this world. He constructed it in 5 days. And then it took him only 1 day to make 20 million suns and 80 million planets. What were they for, according to this idea? To furnish light for this little toy world? That was his whole purpose. He had no other. One of the 20 million suns, the smallest one, was to light it in the daytime. The rest were to help one of the universe's countless moons modify the darkness of its nights. It was quite manifest that he believed his fresh-made skies were diamonds sown with these myriads of twinkling stars for the moment his first day's sun sank below the horizon, whereas in fact not a single star winked in that black vault until 3 years and a half after that memorable week's formidable industries had been completed. Then one star appeared, all solitary and alone, and began to blink. 3 years later, another appeared. The 2 blinked together for another 4 years before a third joined them. At the end of the first 100 years, there were not 25 stars twinkling in the wide waste of those gloomy skies. At the end of 1,000 years, not enough stars were visible to make a show. At the end of 1,000,000 years, only half of the present array had sent their light over the telescopic frontiers, and it took another 1,000,000 for the rest to follow suit, as the vulgar phrase goes. There being at that time no telescope, their advent was not observed. For 300 years now, the Christian astronomer has known that deity didn't make the stars in those tremendous 6 days, but that Christian astronomer does not enlarge upon that detail. Neither does a priest. In his book, God is eloquent in his praise of his mighty works and calls them by the largest names he can find, thus indicating that he has a strong and just admiration of their magnitudes. Yet he made those millions of prodigious suns to light this wee little orb instead of appointing this orb's little sun to dance attendance upon them. He mentions Arcturus in his book. You remember Arcturus. We went there once. It was one of the Earth's night lamps. That giant globe, which is 50,000 times as large as the Earth's sun and compares with it as a melon compares with a cathedral. However, the Sunday school still teaches the child that Arcturus was created to help light this Earth. And the child grows up and continues to believe it long after he has found out that the probabilities are against it being so. According to the book and its servants, the universe is only 6,000 years old. It is only within the last 100 years that studious, inquiring minds have found out that it is near 100 million. During the 6 days, God created man and the other animals. He made a man and a woman and placed them in a pleasant garden along with other creatures. They all lived there in harmony and contentment and blooming youth for some time. Then trouble came. God had warned the man and the woman that they must not eat of the fruit of a certain tree, and he added a most strange remark. He said that if they ate of it, they should surely die. Strange, for the reason that inasmuch as they had never seen a sampled death, they could not possibly know what he meant. Neither would he or any other god have been able to make those ignorant children understand what was meant without furnishing a sample of death. The mere word could have no meaning for them, any more than it would for an infant of days. Presently a serpent sought them out privately and came to them walking upright, which was the way of serpents in those days. The serpent said the forbidden fruit would store their vacant minds with knowledge, so they ate it, which was quite natural, for man is so made that he eagerly wants to know, whereas the priest, like God, whose imitator and representative he is, has made it his business from the beginnings to keep him from knowing any useful thing. Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, and at once a great light streamed into their dimmed heads. They had acquired knowledge. What knowledge? Useful knowledge? No, merely that there was such a thing as good and such a thing as evil, and how to do evil. They couldn't do it before. Therefore all their acts up to this time have been without stain, without blame, and without offense. But now they could do evil and suffer for it. Now they had acquired what the church calls an invaluable possession, the moral sense, that sense which differentiates man from the beast and sets him above the beast, instead of below the beast, where one can suppose his proper place would be, since he is always foul-minded and guilty, and the beast always clean-minded and innocent. It is like valuing a watch that must go wrong above a watch that can't. The church still praises the moral sense as man's noblest asset today, although the church knows God had a distinctly poor opinion of it and did what he could in his clumsy way to keep his happy children of the garden from acquiring it. Very well. Adam and Eve knew what evil was and how to do it. They knew how to do various kinds of wrong things, and among them one principal one that God had his mind on principally. That one was the art and mystery of sexual intercourse. To them, it was a magnificent discovery, and they stopped idling around and turned their entire attention to it. Poor exultant young things. In the midst of one of these celebrations, they heard God walking among the bushes, which was an afternoon custom of his, and they were smitten with fright. Why? Because they were naked. They had not known it before. They had not minded it before, neither had God. In that memorable moment, immodesty was born, and some people have valued it ever since, though it would certainly puzzle them to explain why. Adam and Eve entered the world naked and unashamed, naked and pure-minded, and no descendant of theirs has ever entered it otherwise. All have entered it naked, unashamed, and clean of mind. They have entered it modest. They have acquired immodesty and soiled mind. There was no other way to get it. A Christian mother's first duty is to soil her child's mind. She does not neglect it. Her lad grows up to be a missionary and goes to the innocent savage and to the civilized Japanese and soils their minds, whereupon they adopt immodesty. They conceal their bodies. They stop bathing naked together. The convention miscalled modesty has no standard and cannot have one, because it is opposed to nature and opposed to reason, and therefore an artificiality and subject to anyone's whim, anybody's disease caprice. And so in India, the refined lady covers her face and breasts and leaves her legs naked from the hips down, while the refined European lady covers her legs and exposes her face and breasts. In lands inhabited by the innocent savage, the refined European lady soon gets used to full-grown native stark nakedness and ceases to be offended by it. A highly cultivated French count and countess, unrelated to each other, who were marooned in their night clothes by shipwreck upon an uninhabited island in the 18th century were soon naked, also ashamed, for a week. After that, their nakedness did not trouble them, and they soon ceased thinking about it. You have never seen a person with clothes on. Oh well, you haven't lost anything. To proceed with the biblical curiosities, naturally you will think the threat to punish Adam and Eve for disobeying was of course not carried out, since they did not create themselves, nor their natures, nor their impulses, nor their weaknesses, and hence were not properly subject to anyone's commands, and not responsible to anybody for their acts. It will surprise you to know that the threat was carried out. Adam and Eve were punished, and that crime finds apologists unto this day. The sentence of death was executed. As you perceive, the only person responsible for the couple's offense escaped, and not only escaped, but became the executioner of the innocent. In your country and mine, we should have the privilege of making fun of this kind of morality, but it would be unkind to do it here. Many of these people have the reasoning faculty, but no one uses it in religious matters. The best minds will tell you that when a man has begotten a child, he is morally bound to tenderly care for it, protect it from hurt, shield it from disease, clothe it, feed it, bear with its waywardness, lay no hand upon it, save in kindness and for its own good, and never in any case inflict upon it wanton cruelty. God's treatment of his earthly children every day and every night is the exact opposite of all of that, yet those best minds warmly justify these crimes, condone them, excuse them, and indignantly refuse to regard them as crimes at all when he commits them. Your country and mine is an interesting one, but there is nothing there that is half so interesting as the human mind. Very well. God banished Adam and Eve from the garden and eventually assassinated them, all for disobeying a command which he had no right to utter. He did not stop there, as you will see. He has one code of morals for himself and quite another for his children. He requires his children to deal justly and gently with offenders and forgive them 77 times, whereas he deals neither justly or gently with anyone. And he did not forgive the ignorant and thoughtless part of juveniles even their first small offense and say, "You may go free this time, and I will give you another chance." On the contrary, he elected to punish their children, and through the ages to the end of time, for a trifling offense committed by others before they were born. He is punishing them yet. In mild ways? No, in atrocious ones. You would not suppose that this kind of being gets many compliments. Undeceive yourself. The world calls him the all-just, the all-righteous, the all-good, the all-merciful, the all-forgiving, the all-truthful, the all-loving, the source of all morality. These sarcasms are uttered daily all over the world, but not as conscious sarcasms. No, they're meant seriously. They're uttered without a smile. Letter 4. So the first pair went forth from the garden under a curse, a permanent one. They had lost every pleasure they had possessed before the fall, and yet they were rich, for they had gained one worth all the rest. They knew the supreme art. They practiced it diligently and were filled with contentment. The deity ordered them to practice it. They obeyed this time, but it was just as well it was not forbidden, for they would have practiced it anyhow if 1,000 deities had forbidden it. Results followed by the name of Cain and Abel, and these had some sisters and knew what to do with them. And so there were some more results. Cain and Abel begot some nephews and nieces. These in their turn begot some second cousins, and this point classification of relationships began to get difficult, and the attempt to keep up with it was abandoned. The pleasant labor of populating the world went on from age to age and with prime efficiency. For in those happy days the sexes were still competent for the supreme art, when by rights they ought to have been dead 800 years ago. The sweeter sex, the dearer sex, the lovelier sex was manifestly at its very best then, for it was even able to attract gods, real gods, that came down out of heaven and had wonderful times with these hot young blossoms. The Bible tells all about it. By help of those visiting foreigners, the population grew and grew until it numbered several millions, but it was a disappointment to the deity. He was dissatisfied with its morals, which in some respects were not any better than his own. Indeed, they were an unflatteringly close imitation of his own. They were a very bad people, and as he knew no way to reform them, he wisely concluded to abolish them. This is the only really enlightened and superior idea his Bible has accredited him with, and it would have made his reputation for all time if he could only have kept to it and carried it out. But he was always unstable, except for his advertisements, and his good resolution broke down. He took pride in man, and man was his finest invention. Man was his pet. After the housefly, and he could not bear to lose him wholly, so he finally decided to save a sample of him and drown the rest. Nothing could be more characteristic of him. He created all those infamous people, and he alone was responsible for their conduct. Not one of them deserved death, yet it was certainly good policy to extinguish them, especially since in creating them the master crime had already been committed, and to allow them to go on procreating would be a distant addition to that crime. But at the same time, there could be no justice, no fairness, in any favoritism. All should be drowned or none. No, he would not have it so. He would save half a dozen and try the race over again. He was not able to foresee that it would go rotten again, for he is only the far-sighted one in his advertisements. He saved out Noah and his family and arranged to exterminate the rest. He planned the ark, and Noah built it. Neither of them had ever built an ark before, nor knew anything about arks, and something out of the common was to be expected. It happened. Noah was a farmer, and though he knew what was required of the ark, he was quite incompetent to say whether this one would be large enough to meet the requirements or not, which it wasn't. So he ventured no advice. The deity did not know it wasn't large enough, but took the chances and made no adequate measurements. In the end, the ship fell far short of the necessities, and to this day the world still suffers from it. Noah built the ark. He built it the best he could, but left out the most of the essentials. It had no rudder, it had no sails, it had no compass, it had no pumps, it had no charts, no lead lines, no anchors, no log, no light, no ventilation. And as for cargo room, which was the main thing, the less said about that the better. It was to be out at sea 11 months and would need fresh water enough to fill 2 arks of its size, yet the additional ark was not provided. Water from the outside could not be utilized. Half of it would be salt water, and the men and land animals could not drink it. For not only was a sample of man to be saved, but business samples of other animals too. You must understand that when Adam ate the apple in the garden and learned how to multiply and replenish, the other animals learned the art too, by watching Adam. It was cunning of them. It was neat, but they got all that was worth having out of the apple without tasting it and afflicting themselves with a disastrous moral sense, the parent of all immoralities. Letter 5. Noah began to collect animals. There was to be one of a couple of each and every sort of creature that walked or crawled or swam or flew in the world of animated nature. We have to guess at how long it took to collect the creatures and how much it cost, for there is no record of these details. When Symmachus made preparation to introduce his young son to grown-up life in imperial Rome, he sent men to Asia, Africa, and everywhere to collect wild animals for the arena fights. It took the men 3 years to accumulate the animals and fetch them to Rome. Merely quadrupeds and alligators, you understand. No birds, no snakes, no frogs, no lice, no rats, no fleas, no ticks, no caterpillars, no spiders, no houseflies, no mosquitoes. Nothing but plain, simple quadrupeds and alligators. And no quadrupeds except fighting ones. Yet it was as I have said, it took 3 years to collect them, and the cost of the animals and transportation and the men's wages footed upwards of $4.5 million. How many animals? We don't know, but it was under 5,000, for that was the largest number ever gathered for those Roman shows. And it was Titus, not Symmachus, who made that collection. Those were mere baby museums compared to Noah's contract. Of birds and beasts and freshwater creatures, he had to collect 146,000 kinds, and of insects upwards of 2 million species. Thousands and thousands of these things are very difficult to catch, and if Noah had not given up and resigned, he would be on the job as of yet. As Leviticus used to say, however, I do not mean that he withdrew. No, he did not do that. He gathered as many creatures as he had room for and then stopped. If he had known all the requirements in the beginning, he would have been aware that it was needed. What was needed was a fleet of arks, but he did not know how many kinds of creatures there were, neither did his chief. So he had no kangaroo, and no possum, and no Gila monster, and no ornithorhynchus, and lacked a multitude of other indispensable blessings which a loving Creator had provided for man and forgotten all about. They having long ago wandered to a side of this world which he had never seen and with whose affairs he was not acquainted, and so every one of them came within a hair of getting drowned. They only escaped by an accident. There was not enough water to go around, only enough was provided to flood one small corner of the globe. The rest of the globe was not even known then. It was supposed to be non-existent. However, the thing that really and finally definitely determined Noah to stop with enough species for purely business purposes and let the rest become extinct was an incident of the last days. An excited stranger arrived with some most alarming news. He said he had been camping among some mountains and valleys about 600 miles away. He had seen a wonderful thing there. He stood upon a precipice overlooking a wide valley, and up in the valley he was a billowy black sea of strange animal life coming. Presently the creatures passed by, struggling and fighting, scrambling, screeching, snorting, horrible vast masses of tumultuous flesh. Sloths as big as an elephant, frogs as big as a cow, a megatherium and his harem huge beyond belief, saurians and saurians and saurians, group after group, family after family, species after species, 100 feet long, 30 feet high, and twice as quarrelsome. One of them hit a perfectly blameless Durham bull with a thump in its tail and sent it whizzing 300 feet into the air, and it fell at a man's feet with a sigh and was no more. The man said that these prodigious animals had heard about the ark and were coming to get saved from the flood, and not coming in pairs. They were all coming. They did not know the passengers were restricted to pairs, the man said, and wouldn't care a rap for regulations anyway. They would sail in that ark or know the reason why. The man said the ark would not hold half of them, and moreover they were coming hungry. They would eat up everything there was, including the menagerie and the family. All these facts were suppressed in the biblical account. You cannot find a hint of them there. The whole thing is hushed up. Not even the names of those vast creatures are mentioned. It shows you that when people have left reproachful vacancy in a contract, they can be as shady about it in the Bible as elsewhere. Those powerful animals would be of inestimable value to man now, when transportation is so hard and pressed and expensive. But they are all lost to him. All lost, and by Noah's fault. They all got drowned, some of them as much as 8 million years ago. Very well. The stranger told his tale, and Noah saw that he must get away before the monsters arrived. He would have sailed at once, but the upholsterers and decorators of the housefly's drawing room still had some finishing touches to put on, and that lost him a day. Another day was lost in getting the flies aboard, there being 68 billions of them, and the deity still afraid there might not be enough. Another day was lost in stowing 40 tons of selected filth for the flies' sustenance. Then at last, Noah sailed, and none too soon, for the ark was only just sinking out of sight on the horizon when the monsters arrived and added their lamentations to those of the multitude of weeping fathers and mothers and frightened little children who were clinging to the wave-washed rocks in the pouring rain and lifting imploring prayers to an all-just and all-forgiving and all-pitying being who never answered a prayer since those crags were builded grain by grain out of the sand, and would still not have answered one when the ages should have crumbled them to sand again. Letter 6. On the third day about noon it was found that a fly had been left behind. The return voyage turned out to be long and difficult, on account of lack of chart and compass, and because of the changed aspects of all the coast, the steadily rising water having submerged some of the lower landmarks and given to higher ones an unfamiliar look. But after 16 days of earnest and faithful seeking, the fly was found at last, and they received on board with hymns of praise and gratitude the family standing meanwhile uncovered, our reverence for its divine origin. It was weary and worn, and had suffered somewhat from the weather, but was otherwise in good estate. Men and their families had died of hunger on barren mountain tops, but it had not lacked for food, the multitudinous corpses furnishing it in rank and rotten richness. This was the sacred bird providentially preserved. Providentially, that is the word, for the fly had not been left behind by accident. No, the hand of providence was in it. There are no accidents. All things that happen for a purpose. They were foreseen from the beginning of time. They are ordained from the beginning of time. From the dawn of creation, the Lord has foreseen that Noah, being alarmed and confused by the invasion of the prodigious brevet fossils, would prematurely fly to sea unprovided with certain invaluable disease. He would have all the other diseases. He could distribute them among new races of men as they appeared in the world, but he would lack one for the very best: typhoid fever. A malady which, when circumstances are especially favorable, is able to utterly wreck a patient without killing him, for it can restore him to his feet with a long life in him, and yet deaf, dumb, blind, crippled, and idiotic. The housefly is its main disseminator, and more competent and more calamitously effective than all the other distributors of dreaded scourge put together. And so, by foreordination from the beginning of time, this fly was left behind to seek out a typhoid corpse and feed upon its corruptions and gum its legs with germs and transmit them to the repeopled world for permanent business. From that one housefly, in the ages that have elapsed since, billions of sick beds have been stocked, billions of wrecked bodies sent tottering about the earth, and billions of cemeteries recruited with the dead. It is most difficult to understand the disposition of the Bible God. It is such a confusion and contradiction of watery instabilities and iron firmness, of goody-goody abstract morals made out of words and concreted hell-born ones made out of acts, of fleeting kindness repented of impermanent malignities. However, after much puzzling, you get at the key to his disposition. You do at last arrive at a sort of understanding of it. With a most quaint and juvenile and astonishing frankness, he has furnished that key himself. It is jealousy. I expect that to take your breath away. You are aware, for I have already told you in an earlier letter, that among human beings jealousy ranks distinctly as a weakness, a trademark of small minds, a property of all small minds, yet a property which even the smallest is ashamed of, and when accused of its possession will lyingly deny it and resent the accusation as an insult. Jealousy. Do not forget it. Keep it in mind. It is the key. With it you will come to partly understand God as we go along. Without it, nobody can understand him. As I have said, he has openly held up his treasonous key himself for all to see. He says, naively, outspokenly, and without suggestion of embarrassment, I, the Lord, thy God, am a jealous God. You see, it is only another way of saying, I, the Lord, thy God, am a small God and fretful about small things. He was giving a warning. He could not bear the thought of any other God getting some of the Sunday compliments of this comical little human race. He wanted all of them for himself. He valued them. To him, they were riches, just as tin money is to a Zulu. But wait, I'm not fair. I am misrepresenting him. Prejudice is beguiling me into saying what is not true. He did not say he wanted all of the adulations. He said nothing about not being willing to share them with his fellow gods. What he said was, thou shalt have no other gods before me. It is a quite different thing, and puts him in a much better light. I confess it. There was an abundance of gods. The woods were full of them, as the saying is, and he demanded was that he should be ranked as high as the others. Not above any of them, not below any of them. He was willing that they should fertilize earthly virgins, but not on any better terms than he could have for himself in his turn. He wanted to be held their equal. This he insisted upon. In the clearest language, he would have no other gods before him. They could march abreast with him, but none of them could head the procession, and he did not claim the right to head it himself. Do you think he was able to stick to that upright, incredible position? No. He could keep to a bad resolution forever, but he couldn't keep to a good one for a month. By and by, he threw aside and calmly claimed to be the only God in the entire universe. As I was saying, jealousy is the key. All through his history, it is present and prominent. It is the blood and bone of his disposition. It is the basis of his character. How small a thing can wreck his composure and disorder his judgment if it touches the raw of his jealousy. And nothing warms up this trait so quickly and so surely and so exaggeratedly as a suspicion that some competition with the God trust is impending. The fear that if Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they would be as gods, so fired his jealousy that his reason was affected, and he could not treat those poor creatures either fairly or charitably, or even refrain from dealing cruelly and criminally with their blameless posterity. To this day, his reason has never recovered from that shock. A wild nightmare of vengefulness has possessed him ever since, and he has almost bankrupted his native ingenuities in inventing pains and miseries and humiliations and heartbreaks wherewith to embitter the brief lives of Adam's descendants. Think of the diseases he has contrived for them. They are multitudinous, no book can name them all, and each one is a trap set for an innocent victim. The human being is a machine, an automatic machine. It is composed of thousands of complex and delicate mechanisms which perform their functions harmoniously and perfectly in accordance with laws devised for their governance, and over which the man himself has no authority, no mastership, no control. For each one of these thousands of mechanisms, the Creator has planned an enemy whose office is to harass it, pester it, persecute it, damage it, afflict it with pains and miseries and ultimate destruction. Not one has been overlooked. From cradle to grave, these enemies are always at work. They know no rest, night or day. They are an army, an organized army, a besieging army, an assaulting army, an army that is alert, watchful, eager, merciless, an army that never relents, never grants a truce. It moves by squad, by company, by battalion, by regiment, by brigade, by division, by army corps. Upon occasion it masses its parts and moves upon mankind with its whole strength. It is the Creator's grand army, and he is the commander-in-chief. Along its battlefront, its grisly banners wave their legends in the face of the sun. Disaster, disease, and the rest. Disease! That is the main force, the diligent force, the devastating force. It attacks the infant the moment it is born. It furnishes it one malady after another: croup, measles, mumps, bowel troubles, teething pain, scarlet fever, and other childhood specialties. It chases the child in the youth and furnishes it some specialties for that time of life. It chases the youth into maturity, maturity into age, age into the grave. With these facts before you, will you now try to guess man's chiefest pet name for this ferocious commander-in-chief? I'll save you the trouble, but you must not laugh. It is our Father in heaven. It is curious the way the human mind works. The Christian begins with this straight proposition, this definite proposition, this inflexible and uncompromising proposition. God is all-knowing and all-powerful. This being the case, nothing can happen without his knowledge beforehand that it is going to happen. Nothing happens without his permission, and nothing can happen that he chooses to prevent. That is definite enough, isn't it? It makes the Creator distinctly responsible for everything that happens, doesn't it? The Christian concedes it in that italicized sentence, concedes it with feeling, with enthusiasm. Then, having thus made the Creator responsible for all those pains and diseases and miseries above enumerated, and which he could have prevented, the gifted Christian blandly calls him our Father. It is as I tell you. He equips the Creator with every trait that goes to the making of a fiend, and then arrives at the conclusion that a fiend and a father are the same thing. Yet he would deny that a malevolent lunatic and a Sunday school superintendent are essentially the same. What do you think of the human mind? I mean, in case you think there is a human mind. Letter 7. Noah and his family were saved, and that could be called an advantage. I throw in the if for the reason that there has never been an intelligent person of the age of 60 who would consent to live his life over again, his or anyone else's. The family were saved, yes, but they were not comfortable, for they were full of microbes, full to the eyebrows, fat with them, obese with them, distended like balloons. It was a disagreeable condition, but it could not be helped because enough microbes had to be saved to supply the future races of men with desolating diseases, and there were but 8 persons on board to serve as hotels for them. The microbes were by far the most important part of the ark's cargo, and the part the Creator was most anxious about and most infatuated with. They had to have good nourishment and pleasant accommodations. There were typhoid germs and cholera germs and hydrophobia germs and lockjaw germs and consumption germs and black plague germs and some hundreds of other aristocrats, specially precious creations, golden bearers of God's love to man, blessed gifts of that infatuated father to his children, all of which had to be sumptuously housed and richly entertained. These were located in the choicest places in the interiors the family could furnish, in the lungs, in the heart, in the brain, in the kidneys, in the blood, in the guts particularly. The great intestine was the favorite resort. There they gathered by countless billions and worked and fed and squirmed and sang hymns of praise and thanksgiving, and at night, when it was quiet, you could hear the soft murmur of it. The large intestine was in effect their heaven. They stuffed it solid. They made it as rigid as the coil of a gas pipe. They took pride in this. Their principal hymn made gratified reference to it. Constipation, oh constipation, the joyful sound proclaim, till man's modest entrails shall praise his Maker's name. The discomforts furnished by the ark were many and various. The family had to live right in the presence of multitudinous animals, and had to breathe the distressing stench they made, and be deafened day and night by the thunder crash of noise their roaring and screechings produced. And in addition to these intolerable discomforts, it was a particularly trying time for the ladies when they could look down in no directions without seeing some thousands of the creatures engaged in multiplying and replenishing. And then there were the flies. They swarmed everywhere and persecuted the family all day long. They were the first animals up in the morning and the last ones down at night. But they must not be killed. They must not be injured. They were sacred. Their origin was divine. They were the special pets of the Creator, his darlings. By and by, the other creatures would be distributed here and there about the earth, scattered. The tigers to India, the lions and elephants to the vacant deserts and secret places of the jungle, the birds to the boundless regions of empty space, the insects to one or another climate according to their nature and requirement. But the fly, he is of no nationality. All the climates are his home. All the globe is his province. All creatures that breathe are his prey, and unto them all he is scourge and hell. To man, he is a divine ambassador, a minister plenipotentiary, the Creator's special representative. He infests him in his cradle, clings him in bunches to his gummy eyelids, buzzes and bites and harries him, robbing him of his sleep and his weary mother of her strength in those long vigils which she devotes to protecting her child from this pest persecutions. The fly harries the sick man in his home, in the hospital, even on his deathbed at his last gasp, pesters him at his meals, previously hunts up patients suffering from loathsome and deadly diseases, wades in their sores, gums its legs with millions of death-dealing germs, then comes to that healthy man's table and wipes these things off on the butter and discharges a bowel load of typhoid germs and excrement in the batter cakes. The housefly wrecks more human constitutions and destroys more human lives than all God's multitude of misery messengers and death agents put together. Shem was full of hookworms. It was wonderful, the thorough and comprehensive study which the Creator devoted to the great work of making man miserable. I have said he devised a special affliction agent for each and every detail of man's structure, overlooking not a single one, and I said the truth. Many poor people have to go barefoot because they cannot afford shoes. The Creator saw this opportunity. I will remark in passing that he always has his eye on the poor. 9/10 of his disease inventions were intended for the poor, and they get them. The well-to-do get only what is left over. Do not suspect me of speaking unheedfully, for it is not so. The vast bulk of the Creator's affliction inventions are specifically designed for the persecution of the poor. You could guess this by the fact that one of the pulpit's finest and commonest names for the Creator is the friend of the poor. Under no circumstances does the pulpit ever pay the Creator a compliment that has a vestige of truth in it. The poor, most implacable and unwearying enemy is the Father in heaven. The poor's only real friend is their fellow man. He is sorry for them. He pities them. He shows it by his deeds. He does much to relieve their distresses, and in every case their Father in heaven gets the credit for it. Just so with diseases. If science exterminates a disease which has been working for God, it is God that gets the credit, and all the pulpits break into grateful advertising raptures and call attention to how good he is. Yes, he has done it. Perhaps he has waited thousands of years before doing it. That is nothing. The pulpit says he was thinking about it all the time. When exasperated men rise up and sweep away an age-long tyranny and set a nation free, the first thing that the delighted pulpit does is to advertise it was God's work and invite the people to get down on their knees and pour out their thanks to him. And the pulpit says with admiring emotion, "Let tyrants understand that the eye that never sleeps is upon them, and let them remember that the Lord thy God will always be patient, but will loose the whirlwinds of his wrath upon them in his appointed day." They forget to mention that he is the slowest mover in the universe, that his eye that never sleeps might as well, since it takes a century to see what any other eye could see in a week, that in all history there is not an instance where he thought of a noble deed first, but always thought of it just a little bit after somebody else had thought of it and done it. He arrives then and annexes the dividend. Very well. 6,000 years ago, Shem was full of hookworms, microscopic in size and visible to the unaided eye. All of the Creator's specially deadly disease producers are invisible. It's an ingenious idea. For thousands of years, it kept man from getting to the roots of his maladies and defeated his attempts to master them. It was only very recently that science has succeeded in exposing some of these treacheries. The very latest of these blessed triumphs of science is the discovery and identification of the ambuscaded assassin which goes by the name of hookworm. Its special prey is the barefooted poor. It lies in wait in warm regions and sandy places and digs its way into their unprotected feet. The hookworm was discovered 2 or 3 years ago by a physician who had been patiently studying its victims for a long time. The disease induced by the hookworm had been doing its evil work here and there in the earth ever since Shem landed on Ararat, but it was never suspected to be a disease at all. The people who had it were merely supposed to be lazy and were therefore despised and made fun of, when they should have been pitied. The hookworm is a peculiarly sneaky and underhanded invention. It has done its surreptitious work unmolested for ages, but that physician and his helpers will exterminate it now. God is back of this. He is thinking about it for 6,000 years, making up his mind. The idea of exterminating the hookworm was his. He came very near doing it before Dr. Charles Wardell Stiles did it, but he is in time to get the credit for it. He always is. It is going to cost $1 million. He was probably just in the act of contributing that sum when the man pushed ahead of him, as usual, Mr. Rockefeller. He furnishes the million, but the credit will go elsewhere, as usual. This morning's journal tells us something about the hookworm's operations. The hookworm parasites often so lower the vitality of those who are affected as to retard their physical and mental development, render them more susceptible to other diseases, make labor less efficient, and in the sections where the malady is most prevalent, greatly increase the death rate from consumption, pneumonia, typhoid fever, and malaria. It has been shown that the lower vitality of the multitudes, long attributed to malaria and climate, and seriously affecting economic development, is in fact due in some districts to this parasite. The disease is by no means confined to any one class. It takes its toll of suffering and death from the highly intelligent and well-to-do, as well as from the less fortunate. It is a conservative estimate that 2 millions of our people are affected by this parasite. This disease is more common and more serious in children of school age than in other persons. Widespread and serious as the infection is, there is still a most encouraging outlook. The disease can easily be recognized readily, effectively, and treated, and by simple and proper sanitary precautions successfully prevented with God's help. The poor children are under the eye that never sleeps, you see. They have had that ill luck in all the ages. They and the Lord's poor, as the sarcastic phrase goes, have never been able to get away from that eye's attention. Yes, the poor, the humble, the ignorant, they are the ones that catch it. Take the sleeping sickness of Africa. This atrocious cruelty has for its victims a race of ignorant and unoffending blacks whom God placed in a remote wilderness and bent his parental eye upon them. The one that never sleeps. When there is a chance to breed sorrow for somebody, he arranged for these people before the flood. The chosen agent was a fly related to the tsetse. The tsetse is a fly which has command of the Zambezi country and stings cattle and horses to death, thus rendering that region uninhabitable by man. The tsetse's awful relative deposits a microbe which produces the sleeping sickness. Ham was full of these microbes, and when the voyage was over for him, he discharged them in Africa, and the havoc began. Never to find amelioration until thousands of years should go by and science should pry into the mystery and hunt out the cause of the disease. The pious nations are now thanking God and praising him for coming to the rescue of his poor blacks. The pulpit says the praise is due to him. He is surely a curious being. He commits a fearful crime, continues that crime unbroken for 6,000 years, and is then entitled to praise. He suggests to somebody else to modify its severities. He is called patient, and he certainly must be patient, or he would have sunk the pulpit in perdition ages ago for the ghastly compliments it pays him. Science has this to say about sleeping sickness, otherwise called the Negro lethargy. It is characterized by periods of sleep recurring at intervals. This disease lasts from 4 months to 4 years and is always fatal. The victim appears at first languid, weak, pallid, and stupid. His eyelids become puffy, and an eruption appears on his skin. He falls asleep while talking, eating, and working. As the disease progresses, he is fed with difficulty and becomes much emaciated. The failure of nutrition and the appearance of the bedsores are followed by convulsions and death. Some patients become insane. It is he whom the church and people call our Father in heaven, who has invented the fly and sent him to infect this dreary, long misery and melancholy and wretchedness and decay of body and mind upon a poor savage who has done that great criminal no harm. There is a man in the world who doesn't pity that poor black sufferer, and there isn't a man that wouldn't make him whole if he could. To find the one person who has no pity for him, you must go to heaven. To find the one person who is able to heal him and couldn't be persuaded to do it, you must go to the same place. There is only one father cruel enough to afflict this child with that horrible disease, and only one. Not all the eternities can produce another one. Do you like reproachful poetical indignations warmly expressed? Here is one hot from the heart of a slave. Man's inhumanity to man makes countless thousands mourn. I will tell you a pleasant tale which has in it a touch of a pathos. A man got religion and asked the priest what he must do to be worthy of his new estate. The priest said, "Imitate our Father in heaven. Learn to be like him." The man studied his Bible diligently and thoroughly and understandingly, and then with prayers for heaven's guidance instituted his imitations. He tricked his wife into falling downstairs, and she broke her neck and became a paralytic for life. He betrayed his brother into the hands of a sharper who robbed him of all and landed him in the almshouse. He inoculated one son with hookworms, another with the sleeping sickness, another with gonorrhea. He furnished one daughter with scarlet fever and ushered her in her teens deaf, dumb, and blind for life, after helping a rascal seduce the remaining one. He closed his doors against her, and she died in a brothel, cursing him. Then he reported to the priest, who said that was no way to imitate his Father in heaven. The convert asked wherein he had failed, but the priest changed the subject and inquired what kind of weather he was having up his way.